For me, a key role of the leader is to head strategic direction. Bring the team together, but be very clear about the need to drive strategic direction, which in itself then drives a process of continuous change. My view is if you always do what you always did, you'd always get what you always got. And you need to be able to move on from that. And the only way to do that, in my experience, has been to periodically and methodically think about, well, are we doing things right? Is this the correct strategic decision? Because by doing so, it seems to me it is the only way to drive significant change, by which I mean innovation. And innovation to me is not just a matter of doing the little things progressively better, but sometimes completely re-envisioning the challenge that we face. It's very clear. There's a lot written on innovation in the private sector. I suppose there is less written, but it is equally important in the public sector or the not-for-profit sector. And strategic direction is important. I spent 15 years in the public service in senior leadership positions in the Aboriginal area, in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which I headed, and then in employment and workplace relations, and in education, and then in PM&C. And for different ministers in different governments, I introduced and delivered a whole range of programs that were aimed to deal with social exclusion. The fact that although we are this extraordinarily wealthy and lucky country, that we have significant numbers of Australians who are still outside the mainstream. Not just the appalling disadvantage suffered by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, but a whole lot of people in terms of employment opportunities, educational opportunities, housing opportunities, and so on. So I delivered a whole lot of programs and contributed to some of those. I suppose I was starting to realise by the time I left PM&C, but certainly since I've had time out at the Centre for Social Impact and been able to reflect, that none of those programs were working as they should. In fact, what happened, you had very well-intentioned policies transformed into well-intentioned programs delivered by well-intentioned public servants having the very worst of outcomes. Because what I've started to see was so many of those programs actually reinforced the sense of social exclusion. It may have provided financial assistance, it may have provided levels of support, but it did so in a way in which people learned helplessness. It actually reinforced the fact of being dependent on government and not being self-reliant and able to take control of your own life. So that a whole lot of things that we were doing, still being done in public policy, actually reinforce the social exclusion that you're trying to address. You see similar things in the private sector, but sometimes you have to step back and say, no, the whole strategic direction needs reassessment. And we too rarely do that. I can see now that I would be promoting programs that give individual citizens far greater ability to take control of the government services that are delivered to them, so that people who have a disability and their families and carers can actually make the decisions on what they want to do with the government support in order to live a full and fulfilling life. Quite different approach, and it really is a paradigm shift. Now you see that also in the not-for-profit sector. Last couple of days I've been fortunate enough that the Centre for Social Impact has been one of a number of organisations that has been hosting a visit from the Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus. Now he is a classic instance of profound strategic redirection. Till the 1970s, people were grappling with how to deal with the continuation of absolute poverty in developing countries, and countries like Australia and many others had aid programs that were meant to help developing countries and their peoples. What Muhammad Yunus did, why he got quite appropriately the Nobel Prize, was step back a moment and hang on. We keep delivering things to people who are in abject poverty, but without appreciating that what we need to do is to liberate them. And of course, what he started to do was to give people, particularly women, very small amounts of money as loans. And what he did, of course, was to free up their entrepreneurial zeal. That with very small loans, people were able to start to set themselves up in small businesses and then to pay for their children to go into education. And so was born this whole idea of microfinance, which is now spread around the world. And in fact, you have a number of Australian corporates embracing and a number of banks starting to provide microfinance schemes. But think of the strategic direction involved there. It went from and what we thought was poverty and how we addressed it through aid. And this person, through rethinking strategic direction, has got us to look at that quite differently, and found, of course, that by the provision of cheap loans to people, they are able to transform their own lives far better than any government. Now, those are profound paradigm shifts, I think. You're not going to sit down in a company and each time come up with that. But we can think in the corporate sector of many instances where that's been the case. That organisations have found the need to really make themselves over in new and unexpected ways. And the only way they've been able to do that is to step back from the day-to-day of what they're doing and think, have we got our strategic direction right? Have we assessed our market correctly? Do we actually understand what it is that we are producing? And by having those sort of discussions, have then come back and thought, no, we've got to do things in significantly different ways. So that taking time out to rethink strategy is important. In my view, it's a key role of the board, incidentally. The board should not be getting itself involved in the detail of management. You need to know quite a bit because of the responsibilities that are on your shoulders. But I sit on the board of AMP, the board of Cause Chambers Westgarth, the board of a not-for-profit, the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. The one thing I have come to recognise, if there is one key role of the board, it is help to continually push the question of, have we got our strategic direction right? And in some ways it is easier for the board to do that than the people who are working 24/7 to actually deliver corporate dividends and profits and shareholder value.